today I am going to continue on in our lesson, or in the book of Ruth. Again, I want to continue on in that book, but I want to recap some of the events that we talked about last week, but I also want to fill in some of the blanks that I did not fill in last week, and hopefully give us some principles to live by as well. First of all, the book of Ruth takes place in the time of the judges. The first thing that we learn is that this story is set in that time. Well, on the surface, that doesn't mean a whole lot, does it? But we read in chapter 1, in the days when the judges ruled, and the fact that the book takes place in the days of the judges and when they ruled in the land gives us an indication about the setting and the events that took place in the lives of Elimelech and his family. We read in the 25th verse of chapter 21 of the book of Judges, in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. In other words, everyone did what they thought was right in their own mind. Everyone had their own truth, their own belief system. This verse gives us an indication of what was going on during the period of time. It was a time of moral decay, oppression, chaos, and it prevailed throughout the region. It was a time of division, cruelty, apostasy, running away from God, not having a God, or not having the true and living God in your life. Okay? Civil war and national disgrace was rampant. The book of Judges depicts a rough and violent era because everyone was doing what they thought was right in their own mind. They lived without regard for anybody or anything. It was a time also when there was a vacuum in the leadership in the country or in the nation. There was no leader to unite them or to guide them spiritually. I see a parallel of what's going on in the United States today. I can't help but see that. We also read in the first verse of the book of Ruth that there was a famine in the land. What we can gather from that statement is that there was a material famine. In other words, food shortage, water shortage. The first thing that we think about, again, when we think of a famine is shortage, right? That's right. That's what we think about. But when we read about a famine in the land, we also realize that there was a moral famine in the land as well. Again, everyone was doing what they thought was right in their own mind or in their own eyes. They rejected their moral compass that was to guide their lives. They rejected everything that they had already probably knew in the past about God and what God had done for the land of Israel and the nation of Judah. In other words, there was corruption everywhere you looked. Again, I can't help but strike a parallel between that time and the United States. I mean, look around. I mean, we have murder, we have rape, we have whatever goes on, stealing, lying, cheating, it's rampant. It is. Still, I mean, nothing has changed. Everyone at that time had their own ideas about what was right and what was wrong, and they acted accordingly. But I believe that there was also a famine of the Word of God. In chapter 8 and verse 11 of the book of Amos, we read, "The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord." Again, can't help but strike the parallel about what's going on today. Many of the churches that we have today are not filled with people wanting to hear the words of God, are they? No. And I believe that was what was going on during this period of time as well. Again, there may have been preachers in the land preaching the Word of God. We're not really told, but the people were not hearing the Word of God. It wasn't penetrating their hearts or minds. It wasn't getting through to them, right? They may have heard the Word spoken, but again, it didn't have any relevance to them. No meaning whatsoever. Just another preacher's opinion. Right? What they heard did not make a difference in the way they conducted their lives. So they lived their lives however they pleased, without regard for God's commands or instructions. This famine of material, moral, and Word of God caused people to suffer greatly. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, why is there a famine in the land of Judah, or specifically in Bethlehem, the house of bread? What caused the famine in the land? Was it an indication of global warming? Well, I'm sure you had some people saying back then it was just a natural occurrence, right? A natural cycle of the weather changing. In other words, it was just life as usual. The cycle of the weather had come around and caused a famine. Well, what other experience or what other reason could there be that caused the drought? Well, what I believe is taking place here is that God is in control of all circumstances. Period. Even the weather.
That's right.
Just like He is today. I mean, there are going to be people refute that, argue with you today, saying it's man-made causes. Well, in a sense, yes, no. We cause our own problems, right?
Yes.
We do. But I don't think we're big enough to cause this. I think God is in control. God is in control of all things. He's in control of even the weather. So, what I believe is happening here is the results of disobedience. Okay? If we go back to the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, we discover what I believe is the cause of the troubles that are taking place in the book of Ruth. In chapter 28 of the book of Deuteronomy, we read about the blessings that God would bestow on the people if they obeyed His word or His commands. We read in chapter 28 in verse 1, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all His commands, I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. This was the command. And then you go through the rest of that chapter and you'll find all the blessings that God would bestow on the nation of Israel.